Almost every problem in your life, procrastination, distraction, lack of motivation, comes down to one thing. And that is dopamine. So if you're feeling stuck, low energy, purposeless, or you easily get distracted while chasing goals, this video is for you. First of all, I know that feeling, because even though I was working a full-time job, I lacked direction, motivation, and purpose. I wasted my free time distracting myself on social media, and I often felt tired and lazy. What I didn't know at the time was that I was in fact not lazy, but that my brain was just hijacked by dopamine addiction, and that I'm not the only one. In fact, modern society has recognized that getting consumers hooked on dopamine translates into real profits. If that is the incredible growth story of TikTok, the growing fast food addiction in industrial countries, the online shopping addiction on Amazon, or alcohol and porn, hooking consumers on dopamine translated into a real business model. We are surrounded by this 24/7, and often we actually don't even recognize the addiction that is growing within us. Hi, I'm Simon, and this video is part of a series where I dive into stories, techniques, and systems that help me to unstuck my life and actually start chasing what I really want in life. So if you're interested in that topic, just like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe to the channel to stay tuned for more videos like this. But first, let's look at why dopamine is so deeply engraved into our brains. Dopamine nowadays is quickly labeled as the pleasure chemical, but in fact it goes much deeper than that. Because it goes all the way back to the times when we were still hunters and gatherers, and dopamine was the much needed fuel for desire, motivation, and drive. Back then, humans needed dopamine in order to stay motivated to go hunting, to build shelter, to reproduce, and so on. So basically, without dopamine, humanity would have gone extinct very, very quickly. Now, how dopamine works is that it's constantly produced in our bodies at a baseline level, and it gradually increases over time while we're in the pursuit of very heavy, hard, and difficult things to do. You can imagine that a hunter back in the times needed to stay motivated and hyper-focused over a long period of time in order to chase down a wild animal. In order to stay motivated throughout the hunt, our brain would release increased amounts of dopamine as a reward of doing the hard thing. Now, TikTok, as an example of a high dopamine producing activity, was able to hijack that reward feeling and make our brains produce a lot of dopamine without actually doing hard work. So instead of working for hours and hours in order to get a dopamine release, you simply open up the app and get the firework immediately. You immediately met with bright colors, new sounds, constant novelty, and that basically overloads our brain. So it immediately creates a dopamine spike, but the problem with that is that our brains are not used to high dopamine spikes, which means that we crash out afterwards. And the more spikes you chase, the lower your base dopamine line gets over time. And the lower your base dopamine line gets over time, the more you feel unmotivated, tired, and distracted. And we all know that feeling. Just compare how you feel after reading for 60 minutes versus scrolling TikTok for 60 minutes. When you're not a frequent reader, it takes you about 15 minutes in order to get to that flow state. But once you're in the flow state, our dopamine level rises constantly, at one point reaches a high, and then slowly and steady declines to the baseline level again. This slow and steady decrease of dopamine is actually very long term and makes you feel very relaxed, calm, and energized. Compare that to TikTok. You open up the app and you get hit with instant dopamine spikes for 60 minutes straight. Once you lay down the phone, your dopamine crashes, your motivation is low, and all you want to do is continue scrolling. One quick, easy, and fun experiment to prove this is just to show a Mr. Beast video to your parents.
Hidden in this mountain is a $1 billion nuclear bunker.
We're 2,000 feet underground inside of a mountain.
And it can survive the biggest atomic bombs ever made.
Because his videos are tailored towards creating those dopamine spikes immediately in our brains. And given that our parents didn't grow up in the social media times, their brains are not used to those dopamine spikes. So for them, the same video is too loud, overwhelming, and most likely very stressful. And to us, it's probably normal, but that's just because we got used to this overstimulation, which is already a hint that we might be hooked on dopamine already. One easy way of understanding if something is good or bad for your dopamine levels is simply by looking on how fast you get pleasure from the given experience. The faster and easier it is to get the reward, the higher the dopamine spike, and the bigger the crash out afterwards. But now, back to us. Do you remember that I was saying that you're not lazy, that you're not inconsistent, and that you actually have drive? Let's look at some quick examples and see why you might feel stuck. Have you maybe tried getting up early but you struggled a lot? It's not because you're lazy, but it's because the dopamine levels in the morning are the lowest. And what most people actually do first thing in the morning is that they grab for their phone and scroll on social media. And that is obviously, after what we just learned about dopamine, one of the worst things you can do. Because your brain will have dopamine spikes and you will crash down the moment you have to actually get out of bed. Another example could be that you maybe tried working out consistently, but somehow it never stuck. And here again, it's very important to understand the role of dopamine. Because the moment you step into the gym, your dopamine level is basically flat. But usually once you started working out, your dopamine level rises, and after 15 minutes you're in the flow state and everything just starts happening automatically. And that is just because your body has been producing enough dopamine to keep you motivated throughout that hard exercise. Another example could be that you're maybe trying to eat healthy but somehow always end up ordering the unhealthy option. And that just might be because your brain is hooked on the dopamine fireworks that fat and sugary fast food produce for you. The bottom line is that you're not lazy, you're not inconsistent, you're simply playing against your own chemistry. So now that this is established, let's look at what we can do to rebalance our brain, to control our dopamine production, and to start actually breaking free of all the dopamine addicting habits that are thrown at us and actually start chasing the things that we really want in life. Before diving into 3 things we can do, I have one good and one bad news. The good news is that it's absolutely possible to attack this problem. The bad news is that there's no way around hard work. There's basically no shortcut, and depending on how deep your dopamine addiction is, the first 2 weeks can actually be very tough, because all of a sudden everything will just seem boring and bland to you. But let's see what we can start doing today. The first thing is to become aware of how big of a role dopamine actually plays in our life. We have to become aware of the simple fact that it just exists in our brains and that we have to regulate it in order to take back the control of our life. So basically, after watching this video, you're already one step ahead. And also remember, next time you're in the gym, just push through the first 15 minutes because you're now aware of the dopamine effect, and just see what happens afterwards. Just remember what would have happened to the hunter back in the times when he would have just stopped chasing the wild animal after 15 minutes. The second thing that we can do is actually to start regulating our phone consumption, because our smartphones are simply the biggest driver of the dopamine overload. You could basically say if you have control over your smartphone, you will start having control over your brain as well. The problem with our phones is that they have such a low entry barrier to an overuse of social media, online shopping, and all of those apps trying to lure you back in with all those notifications you have on your phone. The first thing you can do in order to take control of your phone is actually to become aware of your screen time. What also helped me a lot is to install an app that regulates the access to very addicting apps on your phone. I'm using Opal and my screen time has decreased drastically since then. One final tip for every iPhone user is to basically program the action button in order to turn your phone black and white. Just by making your phone less attractive and less colorful, you will automatically have less screen time and less dopamine production when consuming Instagram, YouTube, or TikTok, for example. The third and last thing that you can do in order to control your dopamine levels is to get moving, and that especially in the mornings. The mornings are very crucial because it basically dictates on how your day will be going. And dopamine is actually highly linked to movement. So instead of reaching for your phone when waking up, just simply get out of bed, go to the bathroom, wash your face, brush your teeth, and then go make your bed. So all I'm saying, it doesn't have to be a morning activity like going out for a run or going for a heavy gym workout. It's already enough to just get up, get moving, and not reach for your phone first thing in the morning. So there you go. For me, understanding my brain and the connection between lacking motivation and dopamine overload really helped me in order to stop procrastinating, wasting time, and actually start chasing my goals. And I hope that this video does something similar to you. So like, comment, and subscribe to my channel, because in the next videos I want to break down techniques that help me to start phone fasting, to actually establish a content diet, and how I started a morning routine that I have been repeating for the past 3 years despite not being a morning person at all. I will also produce many more videos that can help you find motivation and actually rewire your brain for success. So as always, see you in the next video.